Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer quick match gameplay. This time around I'm playing as the dreaded Warriors of Chaos against the Empire led by Kakashi Hitaka on the map the Sword of Torgald. This is one of the, I do believe it's a new map that was added with the Norse expansion. So things get started fairly quickly. I wanted to try out a very wide Chaos comp. Lately, when I play Chaos, I usually go for a semi-elite army, usually with a lot of Forsaken, usually with a lot of Chaos Warriors with great weapons, and then usually some of those heavy-hitting support units, like, let's say, like Chaos Knights or monsters of various types, like maybe Dragon Ogres and stuff like that, and usually like a very big, beefy Lord. So I wanted to try out something a little different, and a largely kind of blob mass army with a handful of elite units and support. So for my Lord, I did bring Prince Sigvald. He's the dirt cheap Chaos Lord option. He of course is incredibly survivable with very solid melee stats. I think only slightly inferior to good old Archaeons actually. He does have very solid melee defense. He has expert charge defense, which is huge, and he does have auric armor as well as a standard die, which will allow him to stay alive very easily. I didn't put Foe Seeker or Deadly Onslaught on him because I'm not really going to be relying on him to do much killing. If an enemy lord does get cheeky enough to duel him, so be it, but otherwise he's not here for fighting. He's there to just survive and provide me with leadership. Alongside him is a Chaos Sorcerer of Death mounted on a horse for his own safety. He is coming in, of course, with Fate of Buna and Spirit Leech, which are kind of must-haves with Lord of Death, in my opinion. But since Empire can potentially bring a breakable front line, I decided to bring Aspect of the Dread Knight as well as Doom and Darkness to do a sort of leadership break if given the opportunity. And the rest of my army is a mix of some very elite infantry as well as mostly blob infantry. So I did run 3 units of Chaos Marauders here in the front line. These guys are absolutely atrocious. I'm pretty sure they'll actually even lose against Empire Swordsmen in a straight-up fight, because they do have inferior armor and inferior melee defense, and their charge bonus is the same. I think the only thing they have going for them is HP pool, really, and maybe a slight advantage in weapon strength. Not even. These guys are basically Empire Swordsmen, but a little worse. And a little cheaper. So they're just there to soak up damage for the rest of my army. Behind them are 4 units of Chaos Marauders with great weapons. These guys will tear through armor. They'll tear even through Empire or Great Swords fairly efficiently, or cost efficiently. And once again, they're very squishy, but with those Chaos Marauders in the front, I'm hoping to absorb the blow. Alongside them are Aspiring Champions to boost morale if, and the odd chance that Sigvald does wander off and isn't there around to encourage him. And then my back line of, or kind of my supporting infantry line, really, it's not really the back line, which is very, very elite. And actually, I forgot to mention, I actually did have a Chaos Marauder with a great weapon out here on the flank, so I actually had 5 of them, but this unit over here wandered off on to the flank. But behind, my back line is actually composed of elite infantry, so I have 2 units of Chaos Warriors with halberds just to shut down enemy cavalry, because that is, of course, something like Demigryphs, for example, getting into the back of these Chaos Marauders, even the ones with great weapons, would be absolutely devastating to me. That would probably cause a rout. And alongside them, of course, I do have Chosen, and Chosen are definitely not a popular pick, but they have very high melee attack. They have very high melee defense. They can actually trade pretty effectively. Even with great swords, and they will tear through any of the low-end, squishy, garbage tier Empire infantry like Flagellants or swordsmen or spearmen, anything like that, because they have huge melee defense, monsters all levels of armor, silver shields, huge amounts of HP, especially HP per model. It's over 100 per model, and they do have very solid weapon strength, so against the low armor, they'll tear through units, and they attack pretty quickly. So these guys are can be absolutely brutal against squishy infantry. It's just that they're very expensive, and that makes them they're very susceptible to psychology and various things like that. So people generally don't like to bring them, and of course, focused fire can hurt them just by their shields. So, but here I'm kind of hoping to use them as a support tool. And finally, to shut down skirmishers, because I didn't have any real answer to skirmishers otherwise, was 3 units of vanilla Chaos Warhounds. And you can see they're scattered out all over the place, and already flexing to attack my opponent's grade riders. My opponent did decide to do a bit of an interesting build here with Empire. A front line composed entirely of swordsmen, 3 units of them, backed by a... Well, actually, I should probably go over Lord first. General of the Empire with, interestingly enough, 3 potions, and not the potion of foolhardiness. A potion of speed, strength, and toughness, plus Deadly Onslaught, Hold the Line, Foe Seeker, and Stand Your Ground. So basically bringing almost everything except Potion of Foolhardiness, which is an interesting choice. That's usually the potion you do see used. But alongside him, he did bring a Witch Hunter with all his potions, which is once again interesting, I think, because the Witch Hunter is very susceptible in melee, and those potions only buff him in melee. But of course, he does have a Q's, and he does have Good old slippery, so you can run around and be a pain in the rear and possibly shut down my lords. Then a Jade Wizard stripped down to Dwellers Below and Earthblood, which is kind of the generic build you see nowadays for Jade Wizards, and that'll make him very, very potent against my army here. You can see the grenades from the Outriders going in, and this was, I think, a bit of a mistake on my opponent's part. He did bring 2 units of Outriders with grenade launchers and support, and he deployed them trying to get cheeky Vanguard shots, and he's getting a little bit of damage in, but with my Warhounds here, it's actually making these guys very susceptible to interception. They're not really fast enough. These guys are very slow. They only have 80 speed, which is terrible for a skirmish cap. They won't really be able to get back to their safety of their lines that easily, and so they're going to end up running along my line here, and they're going to get intercepted by the Hounds from over there. In the meantime, my Death Wizard is taking fire from the cannons, which is my opponent's, going over the rest of my opponent's army. He did bring 3 units of swordsmen up in the front. These guys are pretty atrocious against Chaos, heavy infantry, but they will perform well against Marauders, even Marauders with great weapons. And then 4 units of Flagellants, which will tear through Marauders. So these guys are actually a bigger threat to the majority of my army. But they will do terrible against the Chosen and the Warriors with Halberds, which I'm hoping will kind of carry me through. Then finally, this unit of Great Swords over here to deal with my armor, and a unit of sneaky Silver Bullets out on the flank. Finally, of course, those cannons in the back. So, and I'm not a fan of deploying Outriders in Vanguard. I usually don't make much use of it. I simply deploy them behind my army and use them as kind of a stationary unit that can flex really quickly to emergency positions. Over here, you can see my opponent did try to run past my army, and he actually gets partially intercepted by the Chaos Marauders, and more importantly, intercepted by the Hounds, who are tearing through these Outriders very, very quickly. Because I didn't put poison on these guys, I was actually able to afford an extra unit of Hounds, so that was a bit of a win for me. In the meantime, though, my other Hounds are kind of sitting here passively. My opponent did commit his Witch Hunter into the front, which is an interesting choice. The Witch Hunter is not a melee combatant. He should be kept back, honestly. But these Chaos Marauders over here are getting shredded by the grenade launches. But the Silver Bullets do have Hounds on them, and they're getting torn apart. Sigvald is on top of the Witch Hunter, and he will make short work of this guy, in spite of all the potions popped on him. The Witch Hunter is an absolutely terrible melee combatant, and he will get annihilated. Sigvald, in the meantime, is resisting Accusation pretty effectively, especially because he does have that built-in regen, and you can see my Chosen are just plowing in now. Standard Eye has gone off, and these guys will make short work of the Flagellants, and even the Greatswords. Alongside them, Chaos Warriors with Halberds, of course, come in to do some work. Stand Your Ground has gone down the Greatswords, which makes them, in turn, very competent. Chaos Warriors with Halberds, pinstering these Greatswords, who will not last for long. Meantime, this fight over here is kind of really degenerating. The Flagellants are holding their own. You can see Earthblood going down. Aspect of the Dread Knight, though, going down on my units. Actually, not in, yeah, there's Earthblood, but shortly thereafter you are going to see a Doom and Darkness, and that is to shatter my opponent's sort of supporting infantry. Those swordsmen are going to break and just rout. In the meantime, Hounds have gotten on top of my opponent's cannons. My Hounds over here I lost track of, which is a little unfortunate. Over here you can see the Chosen are actually trading very effectively with the Greatswords. Granted, they are kind of mixed in with Chaos Warriors with Halberds, but these guys will tear through Greatswords eventually, and these Flagellants are not going to do very little to them. Sigvald's finally finished off the Witch Hunter. He's pushing in to deal with these clowns. Over here, the Flagellants and all them. And I've kind of wrapped my opponent up over here. Unfortunately, I did get hit by Dwellers Below on this flank, but you can see the Chosen, because they have such high HP, actually tanked it out and are now tearing through these Flagellants very, very efficiently. Because, of course, these guys have massive amounts of armor, they have very high melee defense, and Flagellants are not really going to be able to do very much to them. And alongside these Chaos Warriors with Halberds, they will tear through them in due time. Over here, Hounds are tying down the Swordsmen. Hounds will actually trade fairly well with Swordsmen, which is something people I don't think realize, but the Warhounds, while they're meant to deal with skirmish units, if they can outnumber an infantry unit, they will generally do fairly well in that situation. Over here, these poor swords and Flagellants are tied down and getting slaughtered. Jade Wizard running for his life from Sigvald. Over here, the Chosen are still kind of hacking their way through Greatswords and Flagellants. Alongside the Chaos Warriors with Halberds. This was definitely a bit of a mistake and a bit of cost inefficiency. Chaos Warhounds over here do get tear routed by the General of the Empire, to my misfortune. In the meantime, Silver Bullets are repositioning, as are these Outriders, and they're trying to get some grenades off, doing a little bit of damage. Grenades are very strong and against Chaos, so definitely don't kind of have too much false faith in your armor against them. They're a very strong anti-armor option. Over here, the Jade Wizard is getting torn apart. My Chaos Sorcerer over here is kind of sitting around doing nothing. These Flagellants are getting wrecked. These Great Swords are almost annihilated. Over on the right flank, the Chosen. One of the problems with the Chosen, you can see that they traded very well with those Flagellants. They would have won that easily even by themselves, despite being completely crippled by an Earthblood. But one of the problems with Chosen is they're very slow at doing so. Despite the fact that they have decent weapon strength and all that, they're very slow to hit wise, so it takes them a while. These last Flagellants are kind of getting wrapped up and slaughtered by an overwhelming amount of my troops. Despite a chance of being racked up a few kills, I'm dropping another Spear Leech. This is actually the second Spear Leech I've dropped this game. But at this point, my opponent's army is simply shattering, and that's going to be a rout. So yeah, definitely a bit of a fun matchup. Trying to do a different chaos build. I think people don't. Oftentimes, when people think of chaos, they think of very elite, super heavy infantry. That is kind of the conception most players will have of chaos, and that is also how a lot of people do play chaos. They will run a lot of chaos warriors with great weapons, a lot of forsaken, as essentially their cheapest units, and maybe chaos marauders as cheap units, and maybe chaos warhounds. But generally, you will find very elite or like mid-tier elite armies with like your chaos warriors being a staple, or chaos warriors with great weapons being a staple, backed up by a few elite units. And even I've kind of been doing this lately, but I wanted to give it a shot to try just this mass horde of chaos marauders, and it really worked out, I think. They are pretty cheap, so I was just able to field so many of them, and when positioned up against units that they could tear through easily, they performed very well. For my opponent, the build was not necessarily bad. I do think it's a little light on AP, and the use of a witch hunter in exchange for a Empire Captain, for example, I think is a bit of a mistake. It would have probably been better off bringing simply two Empire dropping the Witch Hunter entirely, bringing two Empire Captains instead of, say, the Swordsman, and using those to stiffen up his front line. Or perhaps dropping the Flagellants entirely and replacing with Swordsmen just because they're cheaper, bringing Captains. Something like that, but just something to tank out that front line. And the grenade launchers, I think, were the biggest bit of a letdown there, because they simply got caught out and slaughtered before they could really get that DPS going, lobbing grenades into my blob of infantry. Dwellers Below got huge value and really beat up on those Chosen, annihilated an entire unit of Chaos Marauders with great weapons, and really kind of mauled an entire flank there. But ultimately, that armor really carried through. The fact that my opponent didn't have enough armor piercing meant that the Chosen even... plus the fact that I had a very wide frontage meant that even if a Dwellers Below landed a good connection, it wasn't going to wipe out my entire army in a single cast. And that's really kind of important with this sort of build. Cannons did some work. The greatswords did huge amounts of work, and most of these kills were actually... well, actually, I guess some of them would have been... A lot of them would have been against Chaos Marauders, so maybe not that impressive, but definitely still good. So yeah, good game to my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. As usual, if you have any comments, criticism, any questions about comps or quick match or Total War in general, or anything like that, be sure to post down in the comments below, and I'll respond as soon as I can. And I'll see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.